As we move through the lessons today, we came to Mark's gospel, where Mark declares the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The beginning. And he looks back, as he talks about this, to one of the lessons we read earlier, the second reading of Isaiah chapter 40, where there's this mention of a voice crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths." And Mark clearly identifies the person he begins to talk about, John, with that voice of the wilderness. So Mark tells us the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, emerges with this ministry of John, who's connecting back to Isaiah and this voice that cries out to prepare for the one who is coming. And John says, the one who is coming is more powerful than I. And John says, I baptize you with water, as the people come out to prepare for the coming of this one. I baptize you with water, but the one who comes after me baptizes with the Holy Spirit. And I don't want you to lose the word holy. Holy Spirit. Because we often like, and many people like, to use the word spirit and spiritual, and remove the word holy. And that's, among other things, very convenient, because then you can kind of define spirit more or less any way you want to. And spiritual is pretty much any way you want. And indeed, our cultures create spirit. And we as individuals can create sort of a spirit. But I want us to distinguish between the human and cultural generated spirits and movements and the Holy Spirit, the holy movement, because the word holy immediately associates us with God, the Creator Spirit, the Spirit that is primal and primary and is the beginning of all things, and from which all things ultimately come. And this Holy Spirit, therefore, is moving us into the deepest intentions of the divine Creator. It is seeking to restore, to connect human life with the divine life, that it might be fully human and filled with divine life. And so the Holy Spirit, the one who brings it, in this case Jesus, comes into a very particular time and culture and place. And the Holy Spirit begins to engage that time and that place. And because of events in our time and place of late, I'm going to choose simply one example of the encounter of the Holy Spirit with, I'll call, the human or cultural spirit. And that's in the way that Jesus approached women. Generally speaking, in Jesus' time and place, the realm of the holy for a woman was defined by the home, very literally. Women belonged in the home, daughters belonged in the home, and their role was to care for their family. And Jesus by no means diminished that wonderful work. But there was, for the most part, with very few exceptions, no place for a woman beyond that bubble. And indeed, women could go with their family to synagogue, but they were segregated back behind a barrier, a screen, and generally were not expected or welcome to learn Hebrew or to add their voice to the prayers. And if a woman was outside of the boundaries of family, they were very much at risk of exploitation. Into this sort of culture, Jesus invites women into his closest conversations and circle of disciples. We remember how he affirmed Mary sitting at his feet with the men in the posture of a learner, a disciple. We remember the story of Jesus in John's Gospel speaking to a woman in a public place at a well, different culture, a foreign woman, and he honors her person with a conversation about the things of great importance to her. And they talk about God and worship and the Holy Spirit. And he, as it were, recruits her to become his evangelist to her community. And she goes and tells people and brings them. And the Holy Spirit is working, and Jesus engages an entire village through the agency of the Holy Spirit in this woman. And then we remember the story in John's Gospel again of a group of men who bring to Jesus a woman who was guilty of adultery. And Jesus halts this in its tracks by basically saying to the men, you don't need to worry about her sins. You need to worry about your own sins and guilt. You're not to be about blaming and shaming this woman. You should be looking to your own blame and shame to deal with that. So we see in this one little aspect of life and culture how the Holy Spirit comes to baptize. The Holy Spirit comes to engage and really critique by default the culture, the institutions, education and learning, the way commerce is done. Look at Jesus' life and his engagement and the way the Spirit moved through the prophets before him. This radical challenge of the holy coming into the midst of human-generated cultures that may have had very good intentions. And so as Jesus came, as John had said he would come, and as the Holy Spirit is engaging and challenging the culture, the leaders of the culture could not stand it. They hated it. And they put him to death. And that's the story Mark's gospel tells, and Mark says this is the beginning of the good news of God. The good news of Jesus Christ, Son of God. Because there were some men and women who were willing to stand it, who were willing to welcome and receive the Holy Spirit imparted by Christ, allowing themselves to be challenged, to be lifted from low places, brought down from high places, and made ready for the movement and the working of God. And so we are obviously invited to be those people today in this particular time and place. People who prepare the way of the Lord, who allow the life of Christ and the words of Christ and the Holy Spirit He gives to come. Come, Lord. Come, Holy Spirit. And we welcome the Holy again into our midst. And we welcome the Holy day by day. And so I leave you with a song. Joy to the world. The Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. Let every heart prepare him room. Thanks be to God.